Continuing on with our NFL division previews, where we go team by team through each division, and we only have two divisions left. Very happy to be joined by my good friend Chase Sessoms, the Wolf of Oaklawn, to talk about the AFC North. Chase, really intriguing division. There were two left. I said, if you want to join me for either one of these, you can pick one of the two, and you picked AFC North. Before we jump on in, I was thinking about it. I'm not positive as far as your NFL allegiances. I know Arkansas when it comes to college, but what about for the NFL? Do you have a team that you root for?
Yeah, I am a New Orleans Saints fan.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I remember that. Okay, I wasn't positive, but that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but whenever you gave me my option to pick a division, I mean, it had to be the AFC North. It's just such a competitive division most of the time, and I love the brand of football that they've played for decades.
And you have a Ravens team that when Lamar's healthy, they're always a double-digit win team. Joe Burrow is one of the cooler players when he's healthy. That makes the Bengals as good as anyone in the NFL. Last year, we saw the Browns have the best defense in the league that was capable of beating anyone. And when we have the Steelers, who are always over 500, as long as Tomlin's been around, and whether or not you like Fields or you like Russ, they'll probably be better than what they were getting last year at quarterback. So it's a really interesting division, and we'll dive into it as we look at the betting odds right here for the division. The Ravens are your slight favorite over the Bengals, kind of in that top tier, and then Browns and Steelers, sort of similar pricing. Same can be said for these teams with their win totals as we start with the Ravens. So their over-under is 10.5 minus 122 I was seeing. So it'll be around that range, depending on where you're looking. So 10.5, maybe even to the 11, if some places have it slightly different priced. They're going to add Derrick Henry to an always potent running attack. It's like, oh, wow, how did these two not meet up before now? Because Henry's one of the true, real, feast running backs that we have left in the league. And this is one of the few teams that still feels like they really want to center around running the ball. You wonder, though, does he have a whole lot left? He still graded out pretty well last year. I think looking at them, you ask some questions about their wide receivers, because it's Zay Flowers, it's Bateman, Deontay Hardy, Walker is a rookie who was at one point a first-round prospect. He fell to the fourth round after an inconsistent year in college. But they get a lot out of their tight end, Mark Andrews, when he's healthy. The last time he played a full season, a couple years ago, he had 107 catches, 1,361 yards, and 9 touchdowns. So that's his ceiling when he's healthy and he has a good year. He's super capable. They don't have a whole lot of differences from last year. Not a whole lot of big changes from a team that was pretty good, Chase. Their offensive line seems like, watching them and kind of reading in for a lot of the things, that seems like one of the big areas of question with this team, because they're young. I think they're going to have 3 new starters this year. They drafted some really good young talent, but they may take a little while for those guys to figure it out. Maybe middle of the year, towards the end of the year, that line starts to come together. That may be one of the weak spots I look at here, but I mean, this is a solid team. They're always really solid when Lamar's healthy and behind the and back there ready to rock.
Yeah, I think it's also, I mean, it's going to be a big year for player development for them. You mentioned the offensive line, but I also think you have players like second-year players like Zay Flowers, who I think take a huge step forward just because of the changes in personnel with bringing in Derrick Henry, with getting Mark Andrews back healthy. He's not going to be the primary, might not be the primary target, might be second targets behind Mark Andrews, but I think he's going to be running wide open in the middle of the field whenever he does get the ball, because his RPO game should be pretty dirty.
He should have every opportunity. I mean, this the offense feels really well balanced too. I still worry maybe against the good teams, they could still perhaps be lacking a pass catcher here or there, but I think Flowers will project to step forward. And if he steps up into that one, and you have him and Mark Andrews, those would be 2 different types of guys who on 3rd down and 6, you can feel pretty confident about looking towards them.
Right. It's like our buddy Uncle Rico always says,
Yep.
you have to have those sort of chain movers.
Yep.
And they're fortunate enough to have two of them. And I mean, defensively, you have, I mean, one, I guess, big departure with, I guess, with Patrick Queen going to division rival headed to Pittsburgh, if I'm not mistaken. But you're still looking at a team that I might be getting Cleveland and Baltimore mixed up, but one of them was number one in defense DVOA, and I think it was pretty certain it was the Ravens. And I think that this defense is going to be great because of the style of offense that they're going to play. You're going to have a really fresh defense a lot of the time because they're going to be able to run the ball and they're going to be able to chew up clock on the offensive side.
The defensive coordinator also not even that big of a change. They have their linebackers coach just move up, someone who's been there for a while. Really cool. He's a first-time play caller, the second youngest defensive coordinator in the league. I think he's only like 32. He was someone who was playing with them, and then I had some injuries shortened his career, but he had been around and been in the system, and everybody liked him, and he just sort of moved and worked his way up. So, yeah, this is a solid team. Like, they're really solid. They got to get over the hump in the playoffs, but that's a different story than regular season, win totals, winning the division, that kind of thing. I mean, they've just shown that when Lamar is healthy, they are going to be a double-digit win team and probably more like a 12-win team in some of their best seasons. Now, they do have a difficult schedule because that's the case when you're a first-place team the year before. Weeks 1 through 5, right off the bat, not easy. At Kansas City to start. Then they get home for the Raiders. Then they got to go at Dallas. They come home for Buffalo, and they go at Cincinnati. So they're going to play some good teams right off the bat. They have, a pretty when you just really break down their schedule, they have to play all of their divisional road games. So that's at Cincy, at Pittsburgh, at Cleveland. Probably not easy in any of those games. They have games at Kansas City, at Dallas, at Houston. Those games won't be easy. And then you have Buffalo and Philly, as well as all of your division opponents at home. So they do play a lot of good teams, but I just expect them to probably win some of those and probably a lot of those games against the good teams and lose a few of them. I have them in the 11-ish range, 12-ish range, because I think the division's competitive, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were 1 or 2 wins over that. And they've always been like a really good regular season team. That's one thing they've just shown us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely the knock is what happens to them once they get into the playoffs. And they honestly almost kind of shed that last year. They were within a couple plays of beating Kansas City. And
they got the first win, which was kind of a nice one too, right? The first one along the way. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a team that could like you said, looking at like 12 wins, maybe even a couple above that. I even like Baltimore as bet wise as the number 1 seed in the AFC. I can get that Absolutely. At plus 500 versus playing them straight up to win the division at plus 140.
Because you still feel like they're a team that's a big deal for right now. Teams that haven't been there. I don't think for Kansas City they're going to be as worried down the stretch about winning an extra game or two as they might about just making sure Kelsey and Mahomes and those guys are healthy. Right? I think this Baltimore team will definitely want to try to get that home field advantage if possible and use it. And they want to get over the hump. They need to get that big victory. Won't be an easy schedule, but it's just really hard to knock them overall as a franchise and as like what they do regular season year in, year out. Even when Lamar was hurt a couple years ago, they were plays away from making the playoffs, and their staff seems to keep them in games because of their defense and the way they run the ball. So a lot of it could really depend on that young offensive line, because they've always been such a well-oiled machine with how they run. A few new players on the offensive line, even really highly projected and high prospects. That's not easy just to flip 3 new linemen. Or Eric, who helps preview a lot of these with us, he has been someone, and I'm sure talks about it with you guys a lot too, has just really opened my eyes to and reminded me a lot of how key the line play is, and something that a lot of people want to overlook, especially if you're not watching and betting a lot of games and you're just playing fantasy and you think about who's the big fantasy players on each team. Like, man, some weeks, if there's a couple starting linemen out, you just see what it does to teams, and how different it could be. So that'll be key for them, but they're deserving. And I mean, they're as good as anyone in the AFC. They're like as proven as anyone in the AFC. As far as regular season, like they deserve to be towards the top of the conference. Chase, you ready to talk some Bengals next? Let's do it.
Let's go. Yes.
Let's go to Burrow with that new hair. I love Joe Burrow. He's got the Slim Shady. I did that, the bleach blonde look one summer, because I used to do the frosted tips, which was good for me because I've got the dark features, but then one summer I thought, oh man, I'm going to do the Eminem look. And I went full bleach from the bottom and I've got the darkest eyebrows in the world. That contrast is just not good. It's really not, like it was pretty bad. And I look back at some pictures and it was just not great. But Joey B, he's rocking the new bleach look, and a healthy Burrow for training camp is kind of important for them, Chase, because they haven't really had him at this point of training camp and preseason really getting a lot of snaps in most years. It seems like all of the years coming into the season, he's a little bit banged up. They're kind of waiting till the beginning of the season to give him looks. He's not taking a whole lot of snaps. And this time, because he was injured last year and because he missed a lot of last year, they wanted to make sure to get him kind of really, really sharp, get some of shake some of the rust off. And he's not looked great in some of their practices and stuff they've had, which is what they were trying to do right now. They want to make sure that by the time the season starts, he'll be a lot more ready to rock and roll. This team won 9 games last year with Jake Browning starting 7, who actually played pretty well. And I was more impressed with their coaching staff last year when Burrow got hurt, because they actually kept putting a team out there that was competitive. They weren't getting beat up a lot of times. Many franchises, when you lose a franchise quarterback like that, they go down. You just are in trouble. You can't find another guy. And they seem to put Browning in a pretty good spot to be successful. They'll have a new offensive coordinator, Dan Pitcher. He's been the quarterback coach working with Burrow. So head coach Taylor will continue to call the plays. Clear eyes, full hearts. Boyd leaves. They'll have a new slot receiver, either Irwin or Burton. They also brought in a pass-catching tight end, Gesicki. Defensively, they added to an already pretty strong defense, and the defensive front in particular. Like, they're never one of the defenses, Chase, that grade like at the very, very top, or they're never like 1, 2, or 3 in DVOA or EPA against. But they always are a really good big game defense that's able to make adjustments to whom they're playing. And they always seem like they come up with big stops and big moments. So they already added to Jenkins. They have Jenkins and Rankins and a couple already good defensive ends. For me, O-line injuries and concerns right now, just looking at and reading some of the blogs and, reading some of the preseason stuff for them, and a great start to their season. They get to play the 3 teams with the worst records from last year in the first 4 weeks of the season. So you have to be 3-1 if you're the Bengals. Like, you feel like you have a good opportunity there. You have New England, Washington, both at home, and at Carolina, all in the first 4 weeks. And the road game is at Kansas City, which is not going to be easy, but they've actually been really successful at, what was it called, Burrowhead for a while, I believe.
Yes. I that was just a curse waiting to happen. A curse waiting to happen from a mayor. That's for sure.
Don't do that. Just don't do that, please.
Don't do it. Yeah.
So Bengals, they're just below the Ravens as far as their win total. It's like priced a little bit below them, over 10.5, and just below them as far as winning the division.
Yeah, I think this is a story of do you keep Joe Burrow healthy? There's one thing that frustrates me to no end with the Cincinnati Bengals, which is I have the same question that I've had since Joe Burrow was a rookie, which is how are you going to protect Joe Burrow? And you notice he hasn't played
every year. I know, it's the same thing.
how have you not addressed this at this point with either a high draft pick with someone on the offensive line or spending some money, which I understand they had to spend some money on Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd this year, or and I I think that my big knock is that I don't know for a fact how they're going to protect him. He hasn't played a full season 2 out of 4 years that he's been in the NFL. And if, he gets injured, then you can flush your AFC North Division winner bet on them, down the toilet pretty much. Even though they have gotten more out of players like Browning in the past. With there was a team that had trouble stopping the run also. They lost DJ Reader to Detroit in free agency, who was kind of a run stuffer.
Big body.
Like you said, yeah, and like you said, they're not a team that's always going to be up there at the top of DVOA. They were 23rd in DVOA last year. But I think you kind of give them a pass on how they didn't sign a little bit more on defense or a little bit more on the offensive line whenever you realize how much money they were going to have to pay Jamar Chase this year.
Yeah. And looking at Pro Football Focus, they have the rankings of each unit, and they rank the units, and they ranked them like 21st in offensive line. So yeah, just not one that you'd hope for more from at this point. Like once you get Burrow and once you've realized, okay, that this is our guy, right? We found our quarterback now. Those should have been some of the first things. They tried to bring in a couple pieces this year, but they're already a little bit banged up and some concerns. So, and that's one of the harder positions to just fill. Like it's like quarterback and kicker, it's one of those weird things where you're telling me there's not more than 15 or 18 kickers out there who you can trust, or 20 quarterbacks at the most that you can legitimately trust. And it's the same thing with these offensive linemen. They're just already, a lot of these teams are struggling. We talked about Baltimore, who's a good team. They have question marks there. They'd love to get a veteran offensive lineman somewhere out there and bring in. A team like Cincinnati could, if they existed. They don't. Their schedule, though, it's funny because you can really, really break it down into pieces. First 4 weeks, like we said, got to come out of that with 3. Then you go week 5 through 11, right before their bye. They go Baltimore, at the Giants, probably a win. Then they go at Cleveland, home for Philly, home for the Raiders, and at Baltimore and at the Chargers. That's not an easy little stretch of games. They have the bye, and then they've got Pittsburgh, at Dallas, at Tennessee, home for Cleveland, in not an easy stretch of 4 right there too. So, yeah, I have a hard time because of the health of Burrow saying this is a 14-win team or something like that. And because their defense has some question marks that you hit and some concerns on the offensive line. Burrow is so good. Chase is so good. They got rid of Mixon, but the running back room will probably just be a little more solid and a little more balanced than they were. And I don't know how much Mixon has left. So that didn't bother me all that much. I couldn't play their over though of 10.5. I don't know if I would line up to play their under, but I definitely couldn't play the over of 10.5.
Looking at the under at plus 105, if I'm going to have something tied up for an entire season, potentially, I need better than plus 105.
I completely, this is a better option, but it's just there's not enough value on this team one way or the other that I see based on their division or based on their total. This will be a week to week team for me. This is a team that I like to play in situations when they're actually a dog or playing against another good team, because they do have some of those intangibles with Burrow that you trust late in the game, and a playmaker like Chase, who's as good as any in the league. So he's the type of guy, or that's the type of connection in a big game. And like I said about the defense, they don't really look as good and they don't measure as great in the metrics, but they do sort of, when they're in spots, come up in big moments. I don't like to play them as a big favorite or when they're overvalued. And I think that's kind of where we are now for them, because we still have some injury questions coming off of last season. Anything else you want to mention about the Bengals?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I will say I want a Chase jersey just because, having my name on a jersey has always been a dream.
Yeah.
So,
that's legit.
The cheap way to do it too, without having to get it custom.
That's legit. I think I've said this to you before. When Geno Smith was like going crazy in college and then was getting drafted, it's funny because he gets drafted, and whenever he would do something well, which wasn't great early on in his career, you'd get some like Geno chance. But then most of the time, you'd get the Geno sucks chance, which was basically like a battle between my dreams and my nightmares. You know, it was like something. It's like, oh man, this is not fun to hear. This is not fun. There are many Genos out there. It's like the segment I always think about the Simpsons. But Homer McFarlane's in there. It says no homers allowed, so very rarely are there multiple Genos, multiple homers, multiple chases. And, getting a Chase jersey would be pretty nice for you. Bengals, second choice in the division here. We move on to a team whose defense was awesome last year. And Joe Flacco got off the couch and was performing miracles for this team. It was unbelievable. The Browns are very well coached, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And that's where this team, if they're very good and if they win games and if they upset teams, it's probably because their defense was very, very good. They added, a couple pieces in the secondary, but they return a lot of the starting defense that was leading the league in EPA allowed per play. Schwartz back as defensive coordinator, Garrett, Zadarius Smith up front, Jeremiah Owusu, stud linebacker, secondary with Ward, Newsome, Emerson. So they're balanced. Like they've got studs on all levels of the defense. They do have some injuries early on though, especially in the secondary. My concerns with them, Chase, are on the offensive side of the ball. And in particular, what do you get from Watson? He has played in 12 games in the 3 years since they've had him. 12 games. He's had 8 big-time throws, 14 turnover-worthy plays. Flacco was way better than him. Way better than him. This year's backups are DTR and Tyler Huntley. You do get Chubb back from injury at some point, but we haven't seen any of the top 3 running backs yet. There's already been injuries to the offensive line. Wills had a bad injury last year, so you have some concern there. Cooper, and then some question marks at wide receiver. They bring in Jerry Jeudy. They have Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman. Tight end Njoku is solid, but he's already been banged up. Cooper and Njoku already sore. So not a lot of positives coming out of their camp just in the first few weeks of like some of their preseason games. And I'll mention new offensive coordinator Dorsey, who leaves Buffalo. He's one of those that I think it's kind of hard to be really critical against him or even really positive for him, because when you have a quarterback like a Josh Allen, sometimes he can be a Band-Aid or he can be a hindrance, right? Like Josh Allen isn't running the script as much that you put out there because he has the talent and the ability to make plays or break a sack and then have a 30-yard run or do something crazy and then the next play turn the ball over. So it's hard for me to like really gauge what Dorsey is based on who Buffalo was, because they're not going to have a quarterback like a Josh Allen here in Cleveland, right? Who's going to be able to do those type of things. There aren't many Josh Allens out there, only a few who run right through the teeth of the defense, like headbutt them, and then can throw a laser beam and then all of a sudden miss a wide open guy and turn it over to the next play, right? Like as Jekyll Hyde, like ceiling floor, he's gotten better and like he's gotten a little more mature, but I think didn't you nickname him like Rich Man's Jameis, something like that? Wasn't it something along those lines?
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's exactly what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So Cleveland, I feel pretty good about what I can expect from them defensively. I'm not sure what to expect with, Watson at the helm, Chubb, who's a really good weapon. I love Chubb. When he's healthy, he's just such a cool old school running back. You always wonder coming off of a big injury like that. And then with their wide receivers, Cooper's getting a little older. Jeudy just didn't have great positive feedback coming out of Denver, right? It just didn't work very well there with him. Much higher expectations there. So a lot of questions on one side, pretty solid on the other side.
And I wonder, I feel like they had a lot going for them in the luck department last year. Like, don't let me
Bounces,
take
right?
away
Lot
exactly.
of
Like,
bounces.
don't let me take away from anything that they accomplished last year because I think it was remarkable. But I want to say they won like 7 1-score games last year.
Yep.
Like the ball is bouncing your way quite a bit whenever that's the case. Also, I don't know what it says about you when you have a quarterback that you paid about $250 million guaranteed to, and one of your biggest offseason signings was the backup, Jameis Winston.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah. Don't
I,
forget about
I
him.
I feel like you might realize that you don't have a very durable person at quarterback if that's what you're spending your money
And
on in the
and
offseason.
but like what's crazy is not even right now. There's not much of a difference between, and this isn't like hyperbole. There's not much of a difference between what Jameis was doing the last time he was on the field and what we've seen from Watson. Watson just has not been good at all. Joe Flacco was so much better than him last
Yep.
year. So much better than him. That's what's a little scary because I feel that way when you're looking at this team and when you were watching them last year. So you kept watching them, and every week you kept feeling like, okay, they're not going to be able to keep doing this. And they would play really well. And some weeks defensively, they weren't great on the road. They got beat up in the playoffs too. So I'm a little colder on this team. I still think they're a tough defense. They're going to be a good defense, and they'll probably steal a couple games here and there. But I do not trust Watson at all. And I'm seeing their win total at 8.5, which is 9. And so if you're going under, you can get plus money on it. I'm seeing like plus 112 on under 8.5. If we go through their schedule, Chase, week 1 they play Dallas. They play Dallas at home. They host Dallas. I mean that's a tough game for them. Week 2 at Jacksonville. I think a lot of people just kind of wrote Jacksonville off. Like that's not just a win for Cleveland
No,
at Jacksonville in week 2. Not at all. Week 3, they came home. They play the Giants. That's a very winnable game. And then weeks 4 and 5, winnable games, but they're on the road at Vegas, at Washington. Neither one of those would shock me, either result, win or loss.
Right.
Then they play a third straight road game against the Eagles. Then they come home and they get back-to-back home games against their toughest division rivals, Baltimore, Cincinnati, back-to-back, boom, boom. Not easy at all the first 9 weeks of the season. How about coming out of the bye? I actually like your Saints quite a bit this year in their division, and I think they're going to be better than people think. Towards the end of last year, their offense was getting better. I have some concerns about the coaching staff, but I think the offensive coordinator is going to help them look a little bit more creative there, and maybe that can be more of the decision making with their offense, like that new coordinator. They got to play Pittsburgh, then at Denver, at Pittsburgh, Kansas City, at Cincinnati, Miami, Baltimore. How about just the final 5 games? At Pittsburgh, KC, at Cincinnati, Miami, at Baltimore. Which of those games are they winning?
I will give them Miami because it's going to be at Cleveland, I believe.
At that point, and it'll be freezing. Yeah, that's
a
good point.
it'll be below 70 degrees, and then that's
and
when
we'll see
shrivels.
McDaniel's going to be bundled up wearing one of those face beanies like he was last time, where like the only thing you see are his lips coming out.
Yeah, hitting the vape pen like he was doing in Buffalo?
Exactly. Like that, they could feel pretty good about their season and go into a stretch of 5 games in a row that you could lose to end the season.
Very, very losable games there at the end, though. I'll say they could go 1 and 4
and
in that stretch,
and in the division, like the divisional games, these teams know each other, right? They always tend to almost split with these teams, even teams that seem like the Ravens and Bengals are better than them. I think they've been really good against Burrow. I think they've had great success against him, and there's been like a weird dynamic with some of these quarterbacks in the division and who they can beat and who they can't. I don't feel good about them this year. Like I did, like you were hitting it. It just felt like things went well for them. I kind of like the underplay of theirs because I think they're more like a 6-7 win team this year.
I'm with you, and I think that it hits the price finally where I think it's a place where I don't mind having my money locked up. Like plus 112, yeah, sure. That's something that I wouldn't mind dipping my toe in with.
Me too. I agree. and you'll get a good rooting interest probably for a lot of the year, especially because the schedule doesn't start out all that easy. So, they have to get to 9 games for you to lose. They can be 8-8 going into the final week of the season, and
Right.
which is probably close to where they are. Like, they're that kind of team. We're just saying 1 or 2 games go the opposite than they did last year. That's generally what happens. You have a year or a couple of weeks where you kind of overachieve and you play over your head, and then you regress generally to the mean. And I think that's going to happen with this team a little bit this year, unless we see a way different version of Watson. Like that is their intangible, but we haven't seen him in years. No. He just doesn't look anything like that same guy before.
Not since the knee injury in Houston. Not since the knee injury in Houston has he looked like Deshaun Watson.
And then you wonder too, because physically he wasn't the same guy, and then mentally he went from being a guy who had one of the higher Q ratings in the whole league. Honestly, at that point, he was so loved coming out of Clemson. Everyone talked about him as like this leader in the locker room, right? And like a real winner. And he had all these intangibles, and he's the franchise quarterback. And then it went a complete opposite to where he's getting booed. Everybody hates him. It was, and rightly so, for doing some awful stuff, but the dynamic there mentally along with physically, like he may not be the same guy in either of those places ever again.
True. Very true.
Let's finish up, Chase, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and shout out to Tomlin, who has been over 500 or over every single year. And this year brings in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, who are in a quarterback battle right now. Both better options than Pickett last year. They were rumored in trade talks with Ayuk. Right now they've got Pickens, Freiermuth, Van Jefferson. Not a whole lot of other real potent pass catchers, but it could be a big year for Pickens and Freiermuth, both as weapons they would look to target a lot. Last year, the offensive line was awful. So they used 3 of their first 4 draft picks on the offensive linemen. But again, when they're young like that, could have some real growing pains early, because they're going to want to lean on their defense, Watt and Highsmith. Those guys are absolute studs. Watt's the only player to lead the NFL in sacks in 3 different seasons since they started tracking in 1982. You pointed out they brought in the linebacker Queen from the Ravens. They have some changes in the secondary, but they're still pretty strong there. And shout out to old Artie Smith, the new OC. I know he gets a lot of crap because last year and the last couple of years, he was not very good as a head coach with the Falcons. I will say, to me, he is like one of the perfect examples of a guy that I thought was a very good coordinator and a head coach was just too much for. You could see, like, when he would do the post-game press conferences, the questions from the media would bother him, and he would stubbornly put together a game plan to piss off the people in the media or the fantasy fans out there. It's like you could hear it in his voice. He was more obsessed with trying to prove a point that this guy is just as good as Bijan, or I can do this and that. And I mean, it was like you could see that it was just too much for him, having to deal with being the head coach. I think in a situation like this, he'll probably be a lot better where this is Tomlin's team. This is Tomlin. Yeah. He's the guy there. You're going to be here and you're going to run the offense. And you know what? The last 2 years that he was the offensive coordinator, the Titans were 5th in points per game and 5th in yards per game. And you don't think of the Titans as being some overwhelming offense that had all these playmakers, right? They had Henry, they had AJ Brown and Tannehill. They were solid, but not, you probably would go, oh yeah, you know what? That's probably a little bit higher than I thought they would be. Maybe a top 3rd team, but not necessarily a top 5 team. So I don't think he's a bad coordinator, was basically all of my jibber jabbering to get there. But he just never seemed like a very good head coach, really, at all. So I think he's in a much better spot here for them. Let's talk a little about the Steelers.
Yeah, no matter what we think about Arthur Smith, he might not have been that great of a head coach. He doesn't have to do much to be better better offensive coordinator than Matt Canada.
Oh my God, he was so bad.
Just a terrible. Just the plan was just flawed from the beginning. So I don't know. I think the old adage might apply here with the quarterbacks, which is if you have two quarterbacks, do you really have one?
I know.
That's the scary part. But with that being said, I mean, I can't say that both Russ and Justin Fields aren't definite upgrades from Kenny Pickett, from Mason Rudolph, from
Yeah.
anybody that even Roethlisberger in his last couple seasons where
I know. He was nothing. He couldn't throw the ball down the field at all, and he couldn't move.
I called him the Shamumblebee because he looked like a Shamu Bumblebee mix.
That's true. I can see that.
Yeah. So I think that they really did what I've been begging for them to do since Roethlisberger's last couple of years, which is they have to get some new blood and upgrade the offensive line. Well, they've done it. They've done it finally. I think it's really what they've been missing and keeping them from winning more than just like the traditional 9 games a year is an offensive line. And I'm glad that they finally actually, put that together. On defense, I mean, I could sit here and try to pick a hole in the defense. I guarantee you that I can't, though. I can't.
They're just really good. They're solid. They're well coached. They punch up. Like they're good. They're a good football team in a well-run organization. They're what's a little like just going through their schedule, and you do this as an exercise because you have to use it as one of the ways you're going to look at teams, but things always change 2 or 3 weeks into the season. There's a couple injuries. Teams don't look as tough as we thought. Other stuff starts to happen. They have games at Atlanta, at Denver, and then home for the Chargers. They could be 2-1. That's like one of the things, like you look at that schedule and you're like, damn, week 3, they didn't really look very good in any of those games, but they're 2-1. Right. That's a real Steelers thing. And
right.
And then you start looking, okay, they go at Indianapolis, home for Dallas, another situation where it's like, yeah, they could lose those games. They could probably win one. They could probably go 1-1. They go at the Raiders and then home for the Jets and then home for the Giants in back-to-back weeks. I think the last part of their schedule, though, that's the part that's really tough. From week 11 on, Baltimore, at Cleveland, at Cincinnati, Cleveland, at Philly, at Baltimore, Kansas City, Cincinnati. So they get the bulk of their divisional games. Yeah, that's just nuts. And then you have Kansas City and Philly sprinkled in basically their other 6 division games. That's
tough.
That's a brutal,
tough as nails.
Like, but I probably feel as good about them as I do about Cleveland, and actually like them better. Like I trust Fields, even Russ, but definitely like Fields just running behind a more talented offensive line that by the middle of the season could be better. And what probably would make me want to say Fields would be the better option early is the young offensive line. Fields being able to move around a little bit is better. But these two guys, actually, I was like, but you know what? Fields, for a quick guy, he did take a lot of sacks last year, huh? So I looked it up. And Fields was second over the last 2 years combined. Fields took 99 sacks. Only one player in the league took more than him and took 100.
Russell Wilson.
So those two guys took a combined 200
sacks
over the last couple of years. So they had bad offensive lines where they were. I mean, this one here is better than either one that those guys had in the last couple of years. So right off the bat, they're better off. And I think Fields just being more mobile would be better off here. So yeah, I think I don't like it enough to bet one way or the other. Like I have them as 8, like around 8 wins. But their over under is 8.5. To me, I probably wouldn't go one way or the other because it's a Tomlin thing, man. Like this is the type of team there are very specific games throughout the year where I know I'm just going to bet them. Like when they come off a week where they got their asses kicked and they looked terrible and they're playing a really good team coming in and that really good team looked awesome the week before and Tomlin's got to go out and give a little soundbite and make sure that everybody knows the locker room is okay. It's like, yep, I'm playing the Steelers that week at +5 at home in a really weird game that looks all stinky. You know, like you can just, they're a team I can fish out some spots for, but I don't like locking them in season wide because they slightly overachieve, but I need to see the offensive line. I need to see a little from the backs, and I need to see one of these quarterbacks like really prove they can be like more than just an average quarterback in the league at this time.
I feel like you can set your watch by the over, 500 or better. And now with the way the league, with the way the schedule goes with 17 games, 9 wins is over 500, which puts you on the over. I'm actually I'll take the over here. And if I were to bet like the exacta for the AFC North, I could see Pittsburgh sneaking, sucking up for second. That sort of thing, especially if the quarterback play is anywhere near as improved as we hope it will be.
And that's the key, right? Like I'm not sure what Russ has left. I really don't. He was better last year than he was 2 years ago. He was much better last year. I do think Fields, if he didn't get ruined from those couple years, which happens with some quarterbacks when they just get put in bad situations. I mean, Fields had nobody to throw to and no line. Like, could you imagine just if he was in the same situation Caleb Williams is in this year, he would have looked a lot better. Like he's going to have like legitimate receivers. But I'm a little more optimistic on Fields being a guy that like has a little something in that there were some games that he was unstoppable running the ball. Like you could not stop him and he would run guys over, and that opens up the passing game a lot. And if you have a weapon, I mean, even just like Pickens and Freiermuth, those are two solid weapons. They're going to lean on their defense, and that should give you, if you're betting they're over, like an opportunity to just be in a lot of games too. They don't need to make as many plays offensively if they're making a few on the defensive side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chase, buddy, before we get out of here, let's get some plugs from you. Tell everybody where we can find you, social media, podcast, anything else that you want to mention out there. Let it all rip, my friend.
Yeah, you can always find me being abrasive on Twitter, at of Oaklawn. That's OF and then Oaklawn like the track. I'll also on Instagram at Wolf of Oaklawn, and check out the podcast, the Notorious OTB, brought to you by the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. It's out Wednesday through Friday every week. So that's my horse racing baby, if you will. And then I've got my stuff that I'm doing with XFL Gym. We got the.
Did I see that you guys did every game of the college football season preview?
We've done that for like 4 years now.
I love that.
Like, yeah, we've got a 2-hour supercut out there of us picking every single game of the college football season, just straight up with no regard with the schedule or anything like that.
That's
just,
so
just straight up.
That's so amazing.
We started in May. We finished in August. It was a labor of love, but yeah, you can find me with XFL Gym. Just let's see. Tonight we're doing our last of our college tailgate previews for the conferences. So we're taking a look at the SEC. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
And man, I gotta say, like, you guys have a lot of fun, and that's the whole idea is you guys are having a good time, but you guys are watching and betting all these games. So on top of all the fun and raunchiness and silliness, there's actually some like legitimate information there. So some real good tidbits in there. I don't know if that's ruining your reputation by saying it for the show, but like there's some serious stuff in there.
Trick them into thinking that they're not learning, and they will, Gino.
That's exactly right. That's how we've had the best teachers that did that for us growing up. Chase, buddy, thank you so much, man. It was cool catching up with you the last few times talking racing, and this time football. I'm sure Eric and I will have to bring you on a few times throughout the season for football stuff. I think we're gonna do our Sunday mornings where we do couple hours before the thing and run through all the Sunday games. So thanks again, buddy. Good luck to you and all your college plays, all your NFL plays, and with the pod and everything. I'm always going back and forth with you on social media. It's not usually a few days between times that you and I speak.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, man.
Awesome stuff from the Wolf of Oaklawn, Chase Sessoms. Thanks so much, everyone, for hanging out with us for the AFC North. One more division left to come. It's the NFC East. And then we'll probably do one fantasy preview with Eric next week when everyone's really getting into their fantasy drafts. So hope everyone has a great week ahead. Good luck playing the NFL this year. If you're listening on the podcast, plenty more to come. If you're watching on YouTube, if you can, subscribe to the YouTube channel, throw a thumbs up, leave a comment. Let us know who you like or if you have any plays in the